The world of amateur sports has allowed athletes to compete for generations without judgments of ideology or politics, but that is changing rapidly. Today's guest, renowned swimmer Riley Gaines, can speak to that issue better and more directly than almost anyone by using her own experience to rally national support for female athletes who are forced to compete against transgender athletes head-to-head. One thing about Riley, she's not afraid to tell it like it is, armed with reason, not rancor. Now the whole country is listening and wants in on the conversation. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., a special edition of 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. My kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
Riley Gaines, welcome to 13th and Park. You probably think I say this about every guest that comes on the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I really am. Let's start by kind of setting context. You started swimming when you were 4 years old, the fastest in your age group at distance at 12. You were in the Olympic trials at 15. The meteor was moving not down to earth, but up. And then you go to the University of Kentucky, captain of the women's swim team. Everything is moving this way. But what people don't appreciate about swimmers is how hard it is to be a competitive swimmer, what it takes, the discipline, the organization, the sacrifices. What is it like to even have a shot at being in the Olympic trials to go on to the Olympics, which of course will happen not long from now in Paris?
Well, first and foremost, let me just thank you for having me on. This is super exciting for me. The platform that you have is really just incredible. But to your point, swimming is a grueling sport. The amount of time that you put in, I mean, in college, 6 hours every single day, easily. 3 of those hours being before 8 a.m. So you get to the pool at 5, you start practicing, you get out at 8, you go to class, you come back, you practice again from 1:30 to 4:30, ate your dinner, did your homework, iced your shoulders, went to bed. You woke up, you did it all again the next day. High school, you don't get to go to prom with your friends. You don't get to have sleepovers on Friday night because guess what? You have practice at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning.
Right.
You don't get to go on family vacations, none of that, because God forbid you took a day out of the water. And I think it's important for perspective here. You're training at that high of a caliber, that level, to merely shave 1/100th of a second off your time. There's so much preparation and work, both physically and mentally, that go into competing and being successful at the highest level. There aren't enough words to accurately describe it. And so It's a love-hate relationship, really. You know, you love, at least speaking for myself, I loved winning. I loved the pressure of competing, but it's not fun jumping in a cold pool at 4:45 in the morning.
But you went through, as many people did, many athletes did, of course, COVID. That changed everything. I remember you talking about how they closed the pool, and to train, you had to go into the lake, right? Not necessarily filled with clean water until things started to get back to equilibrium.
That's right. Unfortunately, COVID was, of course, this was a very unprecedented time. Lots of uncertainty around what this meant. But everything was closed. We were sent home from school about 3 days before we were supposed to leave for our national championships. So the meet you work all year for, that meet was canceled. But upon getting back home, there were no pools open. There were no gyms open. But as I said, swimming is not one of those sports where you get to take time out of the water. Michael Phelps always says 1 day out of the water, it takes you 3 days to get back to where you were previously. So if we took, 2-3 months out of the water, the rest of my season, the rest of my career would be shot. Fortunately, in Tennessee, we've got an abundance of lakes, Old Hickory Lake. I swam miles, aimlessly just hoping and praying that I would continue improving, if not improving, at least maintaining some sort of fitness or skill or speed or technique, so that when we were able to come back, my start of my junior year, I could continue this trajectory that I was on.
So you understood, as other swimmers do, you miss a moment, you miss a day, you miss a week. You would think most athletes would say, okay, I got the week off, I saw some friends, relax. But for a swimmer, missing any time on this trajectory where you kind of want to reach the zenith at just the right moment for just the right race to be able to maybe achieve a personal record, maybe achieve a world record, that any time lost is lost forever. That's something I think people don't get at all about professional swimming.
No, and you couldn't understand it, I don't think, unless you've been there. You're struggling with, of course, your sport, but you're struggling with your identity, your self-worth. At least I was. I put so much of my identity into how I was training, how I was competing, if I was winning, setting goals, breaking records. That was a lot of my identity. And so COVID, while of course there was a lot of negatives there were some positives. That time period taught me swimming's not my identity. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. That's my identity. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. I have a wonderful husband now at the time who was my boyfriend. Those things, those were part of me too, things outside of swimming. And so weirdly enough, at least from this angle of COVID, I'm grateful. I found ways to turn lemons into lemonade, which is certainly something I still find myself doing.
The NCAA championships, the 200-meter freestyle against Lia Thomas. Take us through that.
It was weird leading up to this meet, to our national championships. Like you said, the pinnacle of our sport, the meet you work all year, really all your life for. We had so many questions. We found out about 3 weeks before that national championships that the Thomas would be competing in our category, the women's category. Again, for perspective, this is a 6'4", 22-year-old man who swam 3 years previously on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team, where at best, the year prior, he ranked 554th in the nation when competing against the men, to now dominating the entire country of women. It almost felt like we were living in this twilight zone, really. We knew it was wrong. And when I say we, I mean me and my teammates and my coaches and my family. We knew this was wrong, but we had questions. Is he really as tall as Instagram pictures make him look? Will he be in our locker room? Will he sandbag the races? There were just a lot of questions. And so almost this sense of intriguement. But I feel ashamed for ever feeling intrigued, because upon getting to that meet, upon seeing the tears that I saw from girls who missed out on being named an All-American by one place, after feeling the extreme discomfort in the locker room, hearing the whispers, because that's what they were whispers of anger and frustration from those girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get to this meet. Those feelings of curiosity and intriguement shifted to utter heartbreak and betrayal and belittlement. It felt like we were being mocked.
You looked up at the scoreboard, you saw you had tied Lia Thomas. And then very quickly, things changed and changed dramatically beyond anyone's expectation. The awards that were given for a fifth in that race to Lia Thomas over you had the same exact time. And the explanation from the official, as he told you as chronological, whatever that meant, then went into, look, we've got to do this. And the rationale, it was the photo op. There was a statement that the NCAA wanted to make to the rest of the country at the expense of you and all those women who had devoted so many countless hours and sacrifice to be at their best.
That was the moment when for me. Unfortunately, it took me being impacted in that way before I found it not only important, but necessary, urgent to take a stand. I wondered for so long, where are the adults? What about the coaches or the officials or someone within the NCAA or someone with political power, someone's dad, quite frankly? Why aren't they coming down there and yanking this man out of our locker rooms? And then it hit me in that moment, standing on that podium, holding this trophy I know I have to give back, sharing my placement with a man towering over me. It was this realization of, oh my gosh, Riley, how in the world can you expect someone to stand up for you if you aren't even willing to stand up for you? This has to come from you as a woman, as a female athlete.
The second moment, of course, that the country is very familiar with, San Francisco State University, where they asked you to speak and express your views, and suddenly there are many others who decided to attend that decided to express their views in a way that grew more and more violent.
As Gaines spoke, demonstrators inside and outside of the room held signs and chanted trans rights are human rights. Gaines claims she was ambushed and physically hit by protesters as she attempted to leave. Both Gaines and the Express posted videos showing her being escorted by police to another room. The videos show loud crowds but don't specifically show her being struck by anyone. Her representatives say she was trapped for 3 hours before she could be escorted off campus safely.
Riley, you've described this almost like a hostage taking, right? That you're being held against your will in this room for hours. And then to really pour fuel on the fire, the next day you had to read the statement, the letter from the dean of that university, praising those students for what they believed and how they expressed themselves. How do you have any sympathy for those who are trying to change women's sports perhaps forever and are so one-sided about it that they are among the most intolerant of those in America today?
It's ironic almost that the other side, the people who oppose my stance, they claim to be tolerant. They claim to be inclusive and welcoming and accepting and all the different things, but that is not what I saw in San Francisco. Watching those videos back, it's wild to me. Being ambushed in that way, protesters entered the room, they turned off the lights, they rushed to the front. I'm being pushed, I'm being shoved, I'm being hit by these protesters. Ultimately, where they locked me up for hours alongside the police were also being held for ransom. But then to read the statement the next day from the university, it went out to the entire student body, to all the professors and faculty, saying, we are so proud of our brave students for handling Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. We know how deeply traumatic her presence is on this campus, and so here's some counseling resources for you guys. You know, take the day off of school. Just know that we see you, we love you, we hear you, and we stand with you.
And the one thing about you, Riley, having seen you on all sorts of interviews on television, et cetera, I never get a sense of hate. I get a sense of reason, that you're trying to find the reason in this. And you're not finding, I think a lot of Americans, frankly, are having the same difficulty.
100%. There's no hate in my heart for anyone. You mentioned even, how do you have grace? And it's because we're called to as Christians. The first thing I did when being ambushed is pray for those people, because I saw their eyes. I saw how miserable they looked. I saw how insecure they looked. I saw how they're desperately trying to put their identity into something. But as a Christian, I know the only place that we will ever be satisfied is putting our identity in Christ. That's what keeps me going, is certainly my faith. But yeah, this stand that I've taken, it's not one that's even standing against anything. We get labeled anti-trans or transphobic or what have you. But again, to be very clear, this is not a stand against anything. It's a stand for something. And what I'm standing for is fairness. I'm standing for equal opportunity. I'm standing for privacy, for safety, for transparency. The stand that I have taken is pro-woman. And if being pro-woman is immediately deemed anti-trans, then wouldn't being pro-trans inherently be anti-woman? And what do we call someone who's anti-woman? We call them a misogynist. So if that's the logic, then so be it. But I'm standing for something.
So one of the pieces of this story that has not been widely reported is how, I think it was 16 of Lia Thomas's teammates wrote letters of protest about what had happened. And what they were schooled to do by the administration was to seek LGBTQ sensitivity training. I mean, so that was the answer. It wasn't that they shouldn't feel uncomfortable. They shouldn't feel uncomfortable being in a locker room, maybe shared by someone biologically a male. This goes beyond the all-gender bathroom concept. This is like there are no lines anymore. And if you declare you are transgender and you still are biologically a male, that's what gives you entry into all sorts of areas that make others feel uncomfortable, and justifiably so.
Yeah, no, they went as far to tell these girls that if they felt uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, then here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourselves. Literally told these girls, no, don't listen to your gut instinct. Let your guard down, just shut up and undress anyways. That's what they were telling these girls. Again, far from what the original feminist movement fought for, far from what the Me Too movement fought for. It's those same people who claim to be champions for women and women's rights who are at the forefront, who are leading the charge in dismantling our sex-based rights and protections. What really all of us around the country, but specifically Thomas's teammates, I think a lot of these Ivy League schools, what they went through, that's what we call emotional blackmail. That's what we call gaslighting. It's incredibly harmful to be told to just shut up, to just be quiet. Let your guard down. That's what they were telling us.
Let's get into legislation. So there have now been 24 states that have changed the law to allow for more, we'll call it fairness in women's sports, to reform women's sports. So this kind of issue is addressed. Many others are on the plate. You've spoken, I think, in literally all 50 states, the most recent, I think, being Alaska. What have these legislators, men and women, Republicans and Democrats, what have they learned from you that kind of got them moving with common ground in the same direction?
Well, it's really sad that, one, I mean, we even have to talk about this issue. This is an issue we even have to be legislating on. But nonetheless, it's heartbreaking that this issue has seemingly fallen entirely on party lines, at least in terms of how the media portrays this and how elected officials are voting. Understand I don't mean it has fallen entirely on party lines and society at large, because that's not the case. This is actually a unifying issue, despite how divisive it may seem or how it's portrayed. This is something that every Gallup poll shows. I mean, 85% of Americans agree on men should not be competing in women's sports. But that's not how, again, our elected officials are responding.
It's not how the world works sometimes, right?
No, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. I remember when the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act was introduced in the U.S. House by Representative Greg Steube, and it fell entirely on party lines, meaning 219 Republicans voted in favor of protecting women and girls in sports, and 203 Democrats, mothers and fathers of their own young daughters, voted in opposition of protecting women and girls in sports. And I just remember thinking to myself, you know, most of them, majority of them, they have children, they have daughters. And you really mean to tell me that they would be okay with their young daughters undressing next to a man or training her whole life to be the best at her sport and getting beat out by a less than average man? You really mean to tell me that they would be okay with that? I don't think so. I don't think they really would. I hold this hope in my heart that they don't actually think that.
When you testified before Congress, was that daunting? I mean, you've been all over the country. You're talking to legislators, but then you were before Congress. Was that kind of a different experience for you?
So I've testified before Congress and the Senate many times now. And I remember the first time I did. It was a subcommittee. The committee hearing was called The Rise in Violence Among Left-Leaning Protesters. And I was so nervous, right? I mean, it's Congress, right? The beating heart of the American Republic. And I was just under this assumption that they were very smart and that they knew everything at all times. But let me tell you, it took me 5 minutes into that hearing to realize that these people are not intimidating. I think you get them off that little sheet of paper in front of them that their staffers and their counsel prepares for them, and they have no idea what they're talking about. And so it didn't take me long to realize that and to really not be scared or intimidated anymore, to be able to push back and call out the hypocrisy. Because again, if we don't, who in the world will?
Has anyone told you kind of off the record, we'll say, I wish I could, but for politics?
All the time. I remember when I testified before the Senate, Senator Cory Booker came up to me and he's like, hey, look, I played football at Stanford. You know, I know the value of sports. I know the difference between men and women. And then, of course, gets on the stand and starts grilling me in my position. So that happens, again, all the time.
I hear your dog in the background. Your dog, I think, no, that's great. I think your dog is saying, go get him, girl.
He agrees.
So tell me about one of your best moments in all of this.
Gosh, there's been lots of wins. There really has been. We now have 24 states that have enacted some sort of fairness in women's sports law, which is huge. Again, 3 years ago, there was only one state. So lots of momentum there. I've been working alongside Independent Women's Forum and implementing a bill called the Women's Bill of Rights, which is, I can't even believe it's necessary. It's literally a bill that codifies and defines the word woman. I can't even believe we have to define the word woman, but we have a sitting Supreme Court justice who can't even answer what a woman is because she claims she's not a biologist. Which, guess what? I'm not a veterinarian, but I still know what a dog is, and that's partially because he keeps barking.
Right.
But all things that I'm very proud to be a part of.
Well, Title IX is there to protect women in sports and fairness in sports. That's really what it's designed to do. But you said that the rewrite of this is like setting things back 50 years, failing to define gender and failing to define transgender, gender identity, or define women. So how does one defend what one can't define?
That's the question I've been asking myself this entire time. Again, the same party who claims to defend women, they're the same party who can't even define what a woman is. But not only is the Biden administration's rewrite of Title IX, ridding sex-based protections, it's saying that gender identity and sex are the same thing. They're synonymous. Those words are interchangeable, which means, in a nutshell, that men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces. It means that men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Your speech would be compelled. So you would be forced to use preferred or biologically incorrect pronouns. And if you don't, you would be guilty and charged with sexual harassment. Not the man parading around your locker room. No, to President Biden, that's considered brave or inspiring or stunning or whatever other virtuous word he wants to use. But you calling a spade is grounds for sexual harassment.
You ever stop to think, Riley, about all the people you're impacting and motivating and inspiring that goes well beyond equity and fairness in women's sports? It goes into the willingness, the courage, the integrity of standing on your own 2 feet and speaking out. Again, not with a heart filled with hate, but with a soul filled with reason and goodness.
100%. I don't have hate in my heart. I really don't. It's wild to me that it's considered brave, that it requires courage to say something as simple as men and women are different, to say that there are 2 sexes, to say that you can't change your sex and that each sex is deserving of equal opportunity and privacy and safety. Who's brave is our first responders. It's our veterans. It's people who defend and fight for this country. That's what bravery is. But nonetheless, I won't downplay it. I do understand the threats that people face for not conforming or for even daring to question this narrative, which that's what I believe the premise of this debate is. We're being asked to deny objective truth. I mean, the most basic of truths at that, biological reality, we're being asked to deny.
So, Riley Gaines, who are you going to be rooting for in the Paris Olympics?
Well, as you can imagine, there are very few athletes of that caliber who have taken a stand, who have said, this is wrong. I wouldn't want to compete against a man. I think for different reasons. Some of them have sponsorships and endorsements and different deals where their voices are muzzled, are silenced. But I am still excited to watch. Of course, Katie Ledecky, she is a force to be reckoned with. We are in this new era of swimming now where, let me tell you, I am glad I am done because there is some speed and some talent and skill sets like we've never seen before from young girls. So there's a lot of newcomers at this Olympics. Summer McIntosh, she's already setting world records and she's young. So lots of newcomers who I can't wait to watch and certainly wishing all the best for them.
Well, Riley Gaines, I have nothing to say to you in terms of coaching you on what to do moving forward other than continue to do everything you already are. You are an inspiration to a lot of Americans, and that maybe you've moved the needle in all sorts of ways that will forever go beyond women's sports, which, by the way, is capturing America. We see Caitlin Clark now on the basketball court. It's like wildness. People are really into this. And I think what you've done and are trying to do is give it clarity and strength moving forward in a world where things seem to be changing by the day.
No doubt about that. Well, thank you. Again, I just appreciate you for having me on. And if I can be of any encouragement to you, you keep going too. Your voice and your platform that you've built and developed is a crucial one. So thank you.
Do well for yourself. Thanks very much for being a part of our show today.
Thank you.